Why I love classic film. My channel is about classic film. And there are different types of film. I think it's different. A lot of classic films are black and white, which not many are today. I think the acting obviously is different. Many people say the acting is better now. But a lot of stars in Hollywood, too, are pretty mediocre actors. The ones that aren't as popular are the better ones. Just like old films, a lot of the character actors are actually the better actors than the stars in Hollywood. Some films are in color, but those are the Hammer Monster remakes. The 60s are like those. But most of them were black and white. Even 80s films, I feel like, should be considered classics. But I guess, how many years until a decade is classic? The classic era, for me, is from the 30s to the 50s. That's the golden age of Hollywood. I know the 20s is also an era, but that's like there's a different era. It's like golden age of Hollywood, 30s to the 50s. The silent era is just the silent era. Pretty much you could say from the 1800s to the 30s, really. There are some films that aren't dated. There are some films that aren't dated, like 12 Angry Men. Everyone talks normally, and it feels like this could be a film made now. So for me, that's a film that cannot be dated. Citizen Kane, of course, is one of the greatest films of all time. Created a lot of the shots that everybody uses now. Remember, one of the most groundbreaking films ever made. Orson Welles, one of the greatest directors of all time, and a great actor. Alfred Hitchcock, one of the greatest directors of all time, period, and one of my favorite directors of all time. He's made some of the greatest thrillers of all time. The master of suspense. In Rear Window, he uses visual storytelling, which many directors obviously have copied. Like Christopher Nolan uses a lot of his techniques. I feel like I'm one of the rare young students that appreciates the John Ford westerns. A lot of film students love Sergio Leone, but they do not like John Ford. John Ford is one of the greatest western directors of all time. He made groundbreaking films like the 1930 masterpiece Stagecoach, which is a masterpiece. I love the noir genre. Actors like Humphrey Bogart and Peter Lorre. It has the lighting of a noir. It's always black and white, of course. Love how classic it is. It's always dark. Nothing good happens. Always a bad ending. Perfect stuff. I love classic horror before the blood, the gore, the jump scares, which not many of them are the screams. Again, if you watch a classic horror film, you're never going to have the jump scare. You're just never. Classic horror relies on the atmosphere, and there's cheesy monsters, but I love them. And of course, you had horror actors, you had Lon Chaney, all that. Lon Chaney Jr., you had Bela Lugosi. You had Boris Karloff, but of course, you had Vincent Price, which I think is one of the best horror actors of all time. So you had many of these, just classic films. And I obviously like new films too, but I just love classic films. And this is really my love for it. So, with classic films, there's so much. There's so many films. We got the silent era. And then, we got the 30s. We got pre-code, where there's less rules. There's more, let's look at stories like the gangster films. But then the Hays Code, no gangster films till the 70s. There's more woman type stories where once Hays Code came in, they couldn't really tell a lot of their stories. Pre-code, a lot of silent films tell their stories. Couldn't do that in Hays Code. In the 70s, you saw women's stories again finally getting made because of the Hays Code. So, again, even though it's golden age of Hollywood, there was also censorship in every decade of that era. So, not everything was obviously golden. Not as much freedom as you want. The studios, of course, had to control all that stuff. But the films were awesome. But again, you got Wizard of Oz, Gone with the Wind, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, which were all in 1939. But then you had pre-code. You had films like Freaks, which you could not have in the Hays Code. You had, you know, Charlie Chaplin films, City Lights, and then you had, great films like that. The classic horror films like Dracula, Frankenstein. But then you go to the 40s, you have Notorious, Casablanca, Citizen Kane, The Maltese Falcon. And then the 50s, you have Bad and the Beautiful, Ten Commandments, Ben-Hur, which is still one of the greatest films ever made. And then you have Hitchcock classics, Window, or you have Rear Window. You have Vertigo, North by Northwest. You had new directors like Stanley Kubrick with The Killing, and Paths of Glory, which is one of the greatest anti-war films ever made. So it's just, I love classic films, and my channel is about classic films. So stay tuned to more videos about classics. I'll have film reviews a few times a month, and I also want to do film commentaries in the future. I think I want to commentate films because, again, there's a lot to say, and those won't be scripted. I'm going to do films not scripted too. So yeah, that is my channel, Classic Films, and why I love classic films.